All right, so I'm going to come at it from a little bit different perspective. Matt set the stage really nicely, and I'm going to dive down just a bubble below the surface. But want to try to help you understand the perspective that I'm going to come at this from, which is looking at it a little bit from the business and marketing side of the world, driving into the IT side of the world, what their expectations are, what they're trying to accomplish, and how that should be driving your perspective as you're trying to figure out how should I build these microservices. And we've got some experiences with some companies on the design side as well as on the implementation side where we've seen some of this start to happen, and thought we'd share some ideas of, or some examples of where that's worked, and some design concepts about how that might make things easy on both sides, right? So let's jump in. So I'm going to go through a little bit about the business challenge that your businesses are facing today. A lot of that is common to all of you, but I think it's great to always tell a concise story, right? So let's not assume anything. I want everybody to be on the same playing field. So we're going to go through that a little bit and then talk about, with that as the problem, right, in the digital transformation world, what does microservices promise that's really going to help make a difference to the business? And then looking at microservices in practice, some examples that we've seen and some things that you might want to consider as you're building your microservices architecture. And then some things that we've seen in the environment that have caused some huge disruption and challenges. So some things you might want to try to avoid. And then take some questions if we've got some time. So jumping in, the digital world. Bam, there's the man right there. So in 2007, in June, he stood in San Francisco and pulled that device out and showed it. And some people were really wowed and excited and really got it. And other people were pretty critical and saying, hey, man, I like my buttons, and I don't like that touch screen, and it's going to fail. But it took a long time for that thing to really catch on. So I think the iPhone came out, and we all look back and go, wow, that changed the world. But at that point in time, nobody really got it. Everybody was looking at it going, oh, cool, another really neat, slick, expensive device from Apple that's pretty cool. So it was about 2009, right, before this thing took off. So it's really only been, I mean, just coming up on 6 years since all of these things started to happen. And if you were to think back right now and you look at it and you go, how has this thing changed my life? You look at it and you go, it's pretty radical, right? It's incredibly radical. What if I took it for a week and said, you can't have a smartphone for a week? What would that do to the way you live your life today? Every aspect of it, right? You think about that. You go, it's pretty radical. So when you start looking at that, your company, not just your customers, but your partners and your vendors and the employees in the company, everybody is completely impacted by these devices. And that's the digital transformation that's taken place. And it's a big deal. And it is crazy. And now the customer's in control. He's got a computer in his hand 24 hours a day, and he uses it. It is an information source. It is a tool. It is a weapon. And he is the one that's in control, right? So companies no longer drive customers. Customers drive companies. So that's been a huge transformation from the marketing perspective, from the business perspective, and they're trying to figure out where we used to drive the customer, we're now trying to figure out where in the heck are they and how do we keep up, right? So we're looking at it and say, things are happening fast. So some of these technologies were really new technologies, and then you got, you know, thousands of smart guys that are taking these new technologies and going, oh, cool, and they're building new technologies on top of those technologies. So we've got this exponential explosion of new things that are entering the marketplace that are trying to help companies find that customer, find what makes that customer tick, and convert them to do that thing that you need to do to make your company more successful. And everybody's chasing it as fast as they can, right? So change and innovation are the new norm, right? So we look at it and say, guess what? We don't have to figure out how to get there. We have to figure out how to become a change and innovation organization. And that's the way companies will succeed in the future, right? It's no longer we got to get from A to B. It's we got to figure out how to be an A to B to C to D to E and keep on going company that can do that and be very fluid and very good at change and innovation. So that's the marketing and business side, right? So that's what's been driving them. So we look at it and go, a new model is needed, but we got a problem. The current model is necessary. So we didn't just get here by accident. There was some crazy stuff that happened in 1999 and 2000, right? There was some Enron stuff, and there was some things going on with the MCI stuff, right? So all those things, there's bad behaviors, and then SOX came out and said there's got to be some standardization and compliance, and companies have to have accountability to their shareholders. So we put all of these policies in place to make companies build systems and report on those systems and create stability so that they could create accountability, right? So for the last 15 years, we've been looking at that. And then, of course, right in the midst of all of that, we had the dot-com crash, so everybody's looking at all of these things going on in the digital world and going, woo, be cautious, guys, man, bad things happen when you bet on technology. So companies were scrutinizing how they were using technology. So over the last 15 years, you guys have been figuring out how we shore up our companies and create stability. We create processes that have accountability. We create redundancy. We create disaster recovery. We create systems that are solid, right? And that doesn't happen overnight, and it can't change overnight. So with this new system that's coming in place, how do we retain our our business process and at the same time make radical changes? Because these are not tiny little incremental things, right? We're talking about taking a process that's evolved over the last 15 years and going, that's a sketch. Change it. You go, no, 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 no. We can't change it. But we have to figure out how do we come alongside of it and be successful, right? So that's the concept. So you got the enterprise system, and there it is. And it's not really a turtle. I know that turtle might seem offensive, but you look at it and you say, guess what? You're not swapping your ERP overnight. Nobody's going in and swapping their ERP overnight. And it's a good thing. It provides stability. It provides interoperability between all the different components and aspects of the software in the business system, and it's a good thing. And we need that. And we're not talking about rewriting our entire ERP as a microservices architecture. Not today, right? So we look at it and say, that doesn't happen fast. And we got to keep all of those compliance and regulatory things that we've got. So changing things rapidly on that bottom layer, right, of the enterprise, the stability of the business systems, isn't just hard, it's bad. It introduces an incredible amount of risk. So we really don't want that. But then the conflict is you've got this omnichannel world that's going on that's fast and frenetic. And you've got your CMO and your business is looking at it and going, holy cow, man, everything I just got my head around is no longer relevant. And now I'm trying to learn all this new stuff, and everything's just moving down the road so fast. And I'm trying to get IT to get integrated, and every time I ask them for something, by the time they deliver it, I go, forget it. I don't even need that anymore. I needed that 6 months ago. Now I need something different. So we've got this gap, right? We got stability and accountability, and then on the other side, we've got this world of frenetic, trying to keep up and trying to meet the customer where they're at. So they can't get the market fast enough, and they're trying to increase delivery while retaining a necessary process that's been established. So what we need is an intermediary. So we need a fast layer that lives in between those two worlds. And that's that world of digital platforms and access to data that's going to allow the omnichannel world to move as fast as they can without truly disrupting that lower layer, right? So let me walk through some concepts about how that works, but faster, right? So I was talking to several companies leading up to this, and one of the companies I was talking to said that they have a product that they release still today on 6-month turns. They have a release in June, they have a release at the end of the year. That's it. That will not get it. I mean, if you look at it, you go, but, you know, that's why microservices are so powerful, right? So when you look at it and you go, do we need to be able to make changes daily? No, but we got to get a lot better than 2 times a year, right? So that's the concept. So how do microservices help in that world, right? So you look at it and everybody goes, yeah, holy smokes, man, I'm glad I'm not on the marketing side of the world because their life is really difficult. But how do microservices help in that world? How can I build a system that's going to help make that world better? So let me talk about these concepts from a digital perspective. So looking at those websites and mobile applications and things out there in the environment and how this has helped. So the green box is the services side, the orange is the presentation, and the blue is the business logic, and then you've got that data layer down below and file system storage and all that crazy stuff. So a lot of systems, a lot of companies we've worked through have closed that gap by going into their monolith and writing services inside the monolith and delivering them out as RESTful web services, right? And they go, we've got APIs. And you're going, no, you don't. You've got RESTful web services built inside your monolithic application. So that's one model, but this, everybody understands that's that slow-moving animal, right? That's your 2 releases a year option. And then the SOA model gives you some good abstraction in between those, right? We're not building it into the monolith. Sometimes you've got guys that are taking some of that logic and truly carving it out to the side and building that data store and those services separately. And a lot of times you've got a solution that's sitting on top of the monolith, just providing services that have been written in a SOA architecture, an ESB architecture, sitting on top of monolithic applications. And you say SOA now provides the answer to the problem. But we still got that problem. You don't have agility. All you have is services sitting on top of a monolith, right? And then the Microservices architecture comes in and gives you all of those promises that Matt talked about, which are really great. There's definitely some items up here that somebody wants to go have a conversation with me about in the way that this is presented, I promise you. But I look at it and say, you know, you got the green and the blue inside the box, and that's the microservice. It's got that service and the business logic all wrapped into one thing. It's isolated, it can be scaled, it can do all the things we talked about. The data and how that gets connected to, there's a theoretical model, and then there's pragmatism that says there's things going on where you look at it and you go, yes, ideally, if I can get that data isolated, I will, but if other conditions prevail, I probably can't. So options on both sides. And then I would say don't forget the presentation layer, right? Don't just create a microservice out of everything else and leave the presentation layer to be the presentation layer. Be thoughtful about that in the same conceptual way. All right, so how do microservices help? Agility and functional independence, right? So we understand that that's going to allow all of those things happening from the business side to make incremental changes so much quicker than that 6-month turn where the market needs those things to happen quickly. And keep in mind, we're talking about innovation. You're not talking about the CIO or the CMO coming to you and saying, I need you to build me something that does this, and I know that's what I need. He's going, we think this might work, but we need to test it quickly. Right? So it's an innovation idea. We need to be able to test things quickly, so we got to be able to move fast. So the ability to build a microservice where you can make a change in a week and come back and say, okay, we've got that in there and we think we can do that, that provides that value. The speed of delivery also, right? Where we can do things weekly or daily versus in that 2 times a year. Fluid scalability for unknown consumption is a huge one, right? So we're looking at it today and saying most systems 5 years ago were built where scalability and consumption, who the audience was, what the usage was going to be, what the capacity of the systems were going to be, were all well thought through prior to the architecture being constructed. We're talking about a system where we say, you may build something that is lightly used and expected, or you may build something that is expected to be lightly used, and all of a sudden some scenarios come up where it is exploded in consumption. And I've seen that with inventory. As e-commerce systems and mobile applications and all of these things start coming out where companies were building them through point-of-sale solutions and controlled places, and they had this inventory solution that worked fine, and all of a sudden they put it out there in the web, and it started making the system harder, so they scale the whole system, and then they put it out there on the mobile and go, turn it off. We can't support it. It wasn't built for that. So we've got to have the ability to scale beyond what we know today. You will not know how it's going to be consumed. That's a big concept. And then risk reduction, right? Risk reduction in if I change one thing, I'm not going to ripple the risk. Everybody gets that piece. So what do the layers look like? So from a digital perspective, this is kind of how we look at the world. You've got that omnichannel world, which is exploding and changing, and you can throw the IoT in there, right? It's all the things that are going on with watches and monitoring devices and computers and mobile and blah, 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 and it's changing and new devices are coming out and how they're being used is maturing monthly, weekly. So that's that layer. And then underneath it is this world of platforms, right? So this is a world where the digital side, the business side is playing. And it's a world where they're using platforms to get these things done quickly. So let me show you what that world looks like. Let's see. Bam! Has anybody ever seen this? This is a stack that's put out by Chief Martech. And it's all the technologies that the marketing group is using. And if you looked at the example of this thing in 2012, it was half that. It has doubled. The number of technologies and the types of technologies being used by marketing in order to get their job done has doubled. I mean, think about all of the aspects that they're going through when you talk about creating content and all the technologies around that, presenting content and web content management, monitoring the analytics on the user experience, creating localization, SEO, SEM, the CRM. I mean, these, It's huge. So the CMO is going nuts. He's looking at this, and he's trying to figure it out. I read a really interesting article from Accenture that was talking about, they did the CIO review, and from 2012 to 2014, there was an interesting statistic, just one of them in there if you read that, and that was that the multi-channel, omni-channel coordination in the organization, the confidence level that CMOs felt that they had around getting that accomplished fell 7 points. And the confidence that they felt like they could do a fully integrated omni-channel experience fell 14 points, or 14 or 15 points. So you look at that and you go, well, what happened? Was there a lot of failure? I don't think there was a lot of failure. My personal perspective on that is this. This doubled. Their world doubled. The complexity of their world has gotten so much bigger that they're looking at it now and going, we thought we had our head around it, but as we dove deeper and tried to get our head around it more, we figured out it changed and got bigger. So not only are we trying to satisfy the needs of it's just growing and changing on us. So it's a very difficult world for them to get their heads around. So that's that platforms world. And they're satisfying that a lot. That's inside your organization today. And you don't recognize it. They're doing it through SaaS services. They're doing it through shadow IT, and they're doing it through marketing organizations that are representing and acquiring these technologies for them. So your companies are not stopping moving forward. They're acquiring these through any channel that they can get, and those are the technologies they're using, and that's that platform layer. APIs and API gateway is the way that they want to get into the enterprise. That's their way of working, right? So this is presenting information at the perimeter, and all of it doesn't have to live within the enterprise. Keep that in mind, right? It can be outsourced, it can be partners, it could be anything, but that's the API layer. And go back to a little slide over here. That's that middle layer, right? We look at the platforms and access to data, and that's where the API layer fits into that picture. And then right under that bad boy is microservices. Microservices, keep in mind, don't change the philosophy or the perspective that microservices, even though they're a new generation of the business systems that you're currently providing, you're not changing the perspective of these need to be the stable, reliable, compliant system of record, the solid foundation that the organization is building upon. So that's the concept. All right. So when you look at breaking things down into microservices, I'll give you some practical thoughts on how you kind of right-size those types of things, and then I'm going to go into some examples of things that we've seen. So right-sizing, right? So when you look at the Swiss Army knife, it does everything. It's really concise. It's got a lot of different functionalities, but if you wanted to scale that thing, you have to buy another of all of them. If you wanted to put a new pair of scissors on there because you need a bigger one, you can't do it. You got to replace the whole tool, right? So it's got those challenges, and this is definitely a better model. It gives me the ability to have 5 pair of pliers and 1 pair of scissors and 17 knives. And each one of them scales, right? They have independent functions. I can swap them out. So that's one perspective that says break them down into pragmatic, functional, usable, scalable components. So that's how we break things down, right? You look at it and say, well, this is functionally usable on its own, and would I break the knife down further? Probably not. That's usable exactly as it is. Here's kind of another idea of that concept, which is the engine. So, right, you've got a bunch of independent functioning components that build an engine. You've got a manifold, and you've got a cam, and you've got the pistons and the oil pan and all of these components. But the question is this. You can break it down like that. It makes sense. It's a great organizational way. Each one of these are independent components. But if you don't consume it like that, if it's not a functional component as those independent components, then you don't want to deliver it like that. You want to deliver it like that. So microservice doesn't mean simple. Microservice means singular in function and purpose. So you could have a microservice that is a complex service. Engines are complex. So we're going to have a complex service, but it's singularly usable, singularly scalable. So let's look at some in practice. So we're working with a manufacturer. Some of this stuff we're designing and has not yet been built, and some of it's been built and in production. And I'm just going to give you some pinpoint pieces. But they chose to utilize a strategy that would allow them to offload processes that they didn't need to own as well. So that's one of the concepts I want to kind of share with you. So we look at how they're doing that. You know, they had processes inside of their large system, the big monolith, where they had finding a product and product details and product availability and processing credit cards and address validation and all of these things were all baked into this giant application. But when we started analyzing it and looking at it, we found that there were search services that we could use for offloading that to not have to build that, right? We didn't want to build a system that would allow us to run search services, and we didn't want to house that in-house, so we're looking at utilizing SaaS search service in order to accommodate that function for complex search, fast, efficient, and API ready. Click. And then building a microservice around product information, building microservices around product availability, which needed to scale on its own, and there was some huge cool stuff that we're talking about there that's kind of interesting. And then vaulting services was another one, right? So when you looked at the PCI, they were accepting credit cards in-house. They wanted to get those out-of-house. Taking a nice opportunity here to say, hey, let's establish a relationship. Let's build a vaulting service, and let's do our credit card processing and credit card storage and all of those things off-site. And we're going to utilize third-party web service to do that, and we're not going to rebuild it. And then address validation, same thing. We had an address validation system. We're going to get rid of it. There's an address validation service. We're going to stop utilizing that. We're going to remove that component from our software. So when we start looking at how we were looking at rebuilding the monolith, from a digital perspective, we're going, we don't want to build and own everything. Are there components out there as this API world is maturing that we could go use that are enterprise scale APIs that I can reuse rather than building them inside of my service? So there's something for your consideration. Here's another perspective. So we've got an API for getting product information. And that system today has got an incredible amount of business rules built into it. So it's looking at it and saying our products represent a bunch of different segments of our service, right? And we got a diversity of products, and then there's different types of information within that product set that's going to allow me to give people really granular information. Some of that information may be considered secret information to the organization or IP, right? So you look at it and say, there's all of these rules that are currently built into the current system that manage all of that. So the decision that we made was not to build those rules back into the new system, to say we're going to build a microservice that's going to give us access to all of the things that we need access to. And we're going to push all of those other considerations up to the perimeter. And the intent is to use IAM and the gateway to build policies dynamically to filter what's seen from that web server or from that microservice, so that we can present that out, so that we can change those quickly and easily as they change. Because today the process is every time they have to build a new business rule, it takes them 6 to 8 weeks to make that policy change and get that into place. So if we move that up and out of the microservice, simplifies the model, makes it allows it to move more quickly. So some other examples of things that drove us to that decision were, we wanted to be able to hide pricing. There was different types of pricing. Some types of pricing some people could see, some types of pricing other people could see, and some people couldn't see pricing at all. We said, well, we don't want to manage all of those rules in the microservice. We're going to kick them up. We're going to use our IAM to define the roles in the situations, and we're going to use our policies inside of the gateway to determine how that gets presented when someone requests access to it. We did the same thing for hiding product groups that said certain products should be available to certain people. Hiding specifications, which could be considered secret, and you had to have documents in place in order to be able to see those things. So that policy needed to be proven before we could actually give access. Didn't want to build that into the microservice. Product assigning stores, right? So dynamic. So a company has access to this store, that store, that store. That relationship changes over time. The IAM system was aware of that, pushed it up to there, removed, simplified. So made the microservice simpler. And then get product by role, same type of concept. So anyway, the whole point here is use APIs to meet volatile need. Push it up to the gateway or into the API. Don't use them don't push that complexity down into the microservice. Let the microservice be the true functional piece of the application. Let all that volatile stuff live up at the API layer up above. So another example, it's got a couple of concepts I wanted to cover, was this company that has this monolithic homegrown system for managing service that they go out and do. And they were looking at building a new component on top of there where they could allow other companies and other relationships that they had to drive leads into their system. So They wanted to build a brand new system. And the cool thing about this is they chose this as a great opportunity to start dabbling in and building these isolated microservices that could fit the need rather than taking the monolith that they really want to rewrite and saying, let's start rewriting it. They took this new opportunity and said, hey, let's take this new thing that we're not even doing, that nobody's dependent upon, that's got this net new value, and let's start writing it into a microservice. So building those services out. So here's some thoughts behind what they did. So we had this create a lead, a partner lead. We decided to write that as an API and allow it to aggregate a bunch of microservices. So it has this address validation. They're not using an external system, but they buy a data source. So that data source was turned into a microservice system that runs independently in the enterprise, scalable independently, and brought that in-house. You could easily kick the can and buy a service to do that. Customer create, contact create, lead score, another database. That was a new component. Those two were rewritten components. So this is an interesting part. We helped them rewrite the address validation. We helped rewrite the lead score. The IT group built out new components inside the enterprise as microservices. So there's a kind of this team approach. And we found this credit check piece and decided to use a company that provided an API available for doing a credit check in line, so that when somebody signed up and said, I want to do a lead, it would allow them to do that lead score and then do a credit check so that they could score and rate how they treated that customer, right? And then we would create the lead. Bang, got all the data, create the lead. So when we look at this, you go, you don't want a microservice that does that. Each one of these should be that, and that's where that API provides all that value at the perimeter that says specific need. And if they came up with another one, they could change it. And I've got some examples of that. Same company has this get customer. So we were building that initial system, and we built it for their partners, and we needed this look ahead where they could look up customers. And we needed it on multiple websites. We needed it on mobile sites. So we wrote a JSON API that we could use at the perimeter. And then we wrote a get customer specific customer details API. Came out of that same microservice. And then getting a list of sales reps. Now, microservice customer, they chose not to break theirs down into all those different pieces. They kept all that logic together. And for the perspective of being able to operate as a two-pizza team, you've heard that term, right? And own that thing vertically all the way down, that made sense for them. They just looked at it and said, hey, we don't need multiple microservices. All of these things can live within here, and all these functions perform well that way. Again, more art than science. And then okay, so wait, let's stop. So that was the initial build, and we were able to build that system out. There's a whole bunch of other things that lived alongside this, but this was the initial build. They launched the system. It went really, really well. We were able to build it really, really fast compared to how they built systems in the past. The last system they built that addressed this need took them 12 months to build. This system took them and us 2.5 months to build, and we had launched it within 3 months. So actually it was less than that, but it was 2.5 months. So really, really fast. Got out there, it was really successful. We were able to make, the cool thing is we were able to make churns and changes quickly because it was an innovation perspective, and we made a bunch of changes that the customer was looking at, and adoption all of a sudden just went, pew, and it was really successful. And they went, well, wait a minute. If this is working really well with our partners, why couldn't we do this with our employees and use these same web services and just build an employee referral program on top of it? Same users, same system. We wrote another API that gave us a little bit different data back from the same services, and all of a sudden we built an employee referral program on top of the same web services. The business was excited. They launched that thing in 6 weeks. That's the story. And now they're talking about customer referral. They're going, hey, if our employees can do this, why couldn't our customers have referrals? And we could satisfy all these same needs with these exact same web services for allowing customers to go out and do their own referrals, track, manage, compensate our customers, same way we're compensating our employees. So they're getting ready to launch that. Powerful. Okay, so there's some examples, and then this is just years of experience of doing a lot of these projects with hundreds of customers and just things that we've seen that we went, wow, that didn't go so well, and hey, that worked really well. So we're going to give you some ideas of some things to kind of avoid. So when you're building a microservice, don't overstep the bounds of the microservice, right? Remember that there's two distinct layers. and that the microservices got to be that individually functional, but it's got to be stable, and it shouldn't be built for all of the reactive cases. Try to take any reactive case and push it up. So anything that you're building that you would look at and say, that's a business unit request or a customer request, you could look at that and say, that probably fits in the API layer. Now, if it requires changes to the data structure and you have to add a new element or add a new piece to the service itself, of course you're going to want to make that in the microservice. They should be built for broad use and the demands of the business, not for fringe cases. So that's the idea there. Not just mostly vertical. Yikes. This is the #1 thing you guys are going to struggle with, and it's culture. And the culture is things are done like this. This team owns infrastructure. This team owns data. This team owns customer relationship and BAs and blah, blah, blah. So when we talk about building those two pizza teams, those two pizza teams have got to be a comprehensive team, right? They have to be responsible from the whole thing, from concept to production push. Now, when we get beyond that and managing things in production, I kind of differ on that doesn't need to be a two-pizza team. Stabilize that layer and standardize on that. But owning the product from what changes do we make, when do we make those changes, what does the customer need, how does it impact the software, what goes when, all the way down the chain, needs to be a vertical team. And if you interject one aspect of a horizontal in there, you will slow this thing down significantly. So segregating the aspect of horizontally focused teams will create challenges, right? So the challenges are conflict of priority. They're going to have different priorities. There's going to be VPs that don't have the same opinion you do about your users and your audience that are going to say, no, this is more important, don't do that, do this. You don't want that. You want your team to control their own destiny. There's going to be increased collaboration. Working between teams that don't work together on a daily basis creates a lot of challenges, especially if you're not working in that rhythm, right? The one thing I do know is that when you do 2 releases a year, they're really, 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 really hard. When you do 52 releases a year, they're a whole lot easier because you've done a ton of them. And when you do 365 releases a year, they're even easier, right? The more you do it, the easier it gets. So increased collaboration when you have to go across teams. And it also slows delivery down, and it can slow it down to, we've seen, we can do everything but this, and all of a sudden the whole project stymies. Too many services, not enough support. Start building the microservices, you start building the dream, right? Services will grow faster than adoption. So you're going to start building the services, and the enterprise is not quite in the same place that you are. You've got theoretical buy-in, you've got an understanding of the value, and now you've got to go out there and communicate it. But once you communicate it, the business has got to understand, well, what does that do for us and where does it fit? And those things take time. The thing that's going to accelerate them more than anything is going to be the ability to see a success. So once they see something that works, their wheels are going to start spinning like I was showing you in that example. Hey, if we can do that, we can do this. Holy smokes, if we can do that, we can do this. And then the next thing you're going to see is that your team sizes are going to mirror your demand, which at the beginning is going to be small. So you may decide, I've got one team, and they can handle this many microservices based on the demand that they've got. And then all of a sudden, adoption kicks in. And you find out that budgets and manning plans and all of those things are already set. And we go, we need to grow the team. And you go, well, nobody's got any money to grow the team. You go, so these are just cautions from things that we've seen that we look at and go, when you go, understand that adoption is going to lag creation. And I'm not telling you to build the team. Don't do an if we build it, they will come, but definitely do a when they come, I can scale quickly approach. Meaning, get your funding approved and ready to go. Understand that this thing's going to grow. I don't want to hire it now. I don't want to use it now. I might need it. I might not. But if I need it, I need it because we're making a promise. So if I have to grow the teams and add more teams to be able to spread out and accommodate demand, be prepared for that. Don't just launch a bunch of stuff and then all of a sudden go, oh crap, now what? Because you're going to break the promise of the microservice, which is agility. And you're going to go, my teams are overloaded. I can't move fast. So caution. Governed by risk, not by ritual. So I'm a big proponent of this. You look at it and you say, do not take an LCD perspective on process. lowest common denominator of risk. We're going to take our highest risk scenario and we're going to apply it to everything we do, right? Don't do that. So I'm going to give you a couple of perspectives. Experimentation and innovation are absolutely going to be a part of your organization. They are today, but you guys need to own that too, right? So you look at it and you say, you need a separate process specifically for innovation. Allow a formal channel that says, I expect you to be able to do crazy things over here that break the norms because we need to innovate quickly and we need to grow. So I need a separate process for ops than I have for innovation, but I need a channel for innovation that says nobody's using it, nobody's doing it, why can't we do it quickly? Allow them to just go off the rails, right? Within some guidelines that says you need to follow some structure so that we can move it into our ops process. And keep innovation stack as like the ops stack as possible, unless there's something that they're looking at and saying, hey, we want to innovate on a piece of the ops stack to prove out that we can do something different and better. But allow for that innovation and allow for that in ops. And then have benchmarks for when an innovation microservice will go to ops, right, so that you understand that. And then have an identified process for transition. And then the last piece on that is going to be make sure that you have in your process for your ops, for managing your microservices, a risk factor baked into that, meaning not every change carries the same risk. So don't make all changes follow the same process. Don't take a high-risk change that should take a lot of time and should be cautiously interjected, and then take a low-risk, no-risk change and make it follow the same slow process, right? Allow risk to be a part of that factor. New model, this is something that Matt touched on. New model and old delivery equals bad, right? So as stated previously, microservices can create distinct advantages, but in order to realize them, you have to adopt some new processes. So Agile or DevOps, test-driven, that's a, wow. So you guys working with developers? Not every developer is a test-driven developer. They don't think like that. A lot of them can write the code that you told them to write, but when you tell them, I need you to write something that you can write test cases into the code and prove that this thing is going to work before you turn it over to somebody else, not everybody does a really good job of creating an airtight test scenario in every piece of code that they write. So that's one of those challenges that you might face. Product ownership, not built to spec. So keep in mind, those two pizza teams own the product from top to bottom, and that's not the way that development teams inside of organizations work. They get business requirements from the business, and the business analyst provides them to them, and they take those specs and they build what you ask for. This is a little bit different. So you may need that BA on the team who's working collaboratively with that IT team, and they work, or that development team, and they work with the business. They work with the customers consuming the service to understand that. So that's a big change. That's a really big change. Big bang, more like big bust. We've talked on that. If you're not doing microservices today, then starting to do microservices for the first time is innovation. Treat innovation separate, right? And don't go at it and say, we're going to rewrite the big system. Because what happens is, the bigger the project, the more complex, the more risk, the more cost, the more eyes, the more risk to you. The more people looking at it, the more you're concerned about what are people going to think if it fails. And failure is bad and it jeopardizes my career, so I don't want failure. So the more people looking at it, the harder it is to get things done quickly. So all these things start stacking up when you make it a big project. So don't do that. Don't do that. Try to find a way to build the model and get the innovation working to where failure becomes an expectation. And you can fail inside of your organization and you can prove out how it's supposed to work quickly. And once you get that stack solidified and agreed upon and the process is working, then start scaling that thing out. Complexity and risk, right? With attention comes failure, right. So start small and vertical. Build out the stack, build out something. One of the things we were looking at is build something brand new that has a lot of value to the organization but is not currently being used, that could be a success story. And that way you got a lot less people that are all uptight and concerned about if this fails, it's going to impact my current ops, right? So there you go. Hopefully there was some little golden nuggets in there and some considerations for as you build your microservices, things you can keep in mind.